Hello everyone. I don't know if you've ever, when you're eating cereal, you looked at the side of the box and you saw a puzzle on the side. Well, today we're going to take a look at a little word puzzle here that sort of reminds me of when I used to eat a lot of cereal. In fact, I still eat a lot of cereal. I just don't pay quite as much attention to the box. And so let's see here if we can draw here. So I have this little word puzzle here. You'll notice here that it is actually 1, 2, 3. Let's see here. 4 and how do I get rid of the screen draw? Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters wide. Okay, and notice right here that I have the same array here, the same grid of characters at 5 characters wide, and it's also 6 rows tall. Okay, and down below I marked it with column indices and row indices. So if we take a look here at this character A, it is at row 0, and actually it's if you're using 0 base, and column number 3. Okay, so and then let's take a look at another interesting artifact here. Notice here the column here starts with an H, second row, first column is an E, third is an A, and I actually flipped this on its side. So if you look at this first column here, it became the first row. You look at the second column here, it starts with a D here. It actually becomes the second row, third row, fourth row, and fifth row. So we had 5 columns here, and those became 5 rows on the side. It got flipped on its side. And if you notice here below, the array actually turns out to be, or this thing when it's laid all out here flat, leads to this phrase: heated discussion leads nowhere. And it's actually 30 characters wide, and I put a little 0 here at the end. Now you'd be wondering, I numbered this with 0 through 9, 0 through 9, so 30 characters total. Well, the thing is we're going to notice is that at the end of each string, there's actually a null 0. We need to add a little extra space to that. So for each one of these rows here, and this array right here, it's going to be an extra character. It's called the null 0 there. Same thing with the array up here. So we're going to have a 2-dimensional array. So at the end of this here, there's going to be a null 0. Let's take a look at the code that we have for this. Okay. So first of all, I declared that first array that you saw there in this 2-dimensional array. It's called my array here with the number of rows, and the number of rows is equal to 6 here. And even though it starts with 0 and the indices go from 0 to 5, as you can see the comments to the right here, it's 6 dimension high, and the width is 5, and once again the indices for the columns go from 0 through 4. Now when I said the columns here, I added 1, and that basically gives extra space for the null 0 that you don't see here. It's actually because these are in double quotes. Now I also made a second array. We're going to transpose this array. We're going to lay it on the side like you saw in that text file there, and this is the transpose array. And now you'll notice I flipped the columns here. Once again, the columns are for the number. It actually matches the rows in the second array. And then for the rows, once again, I did the rows here, and I added the 1. Okay. And finally, we have this glued together array. It glues the transposed array into one big long character array. I declared this with the rows times number of columns, once again adding 1 for the null 0. And I have these I and J variables here that are used for indices tracking, walking through it. Now on the glued array, because we're going to use this concat function here, you notice that I assigned it to a null 0. This is actually a null 0. It's \0 there, and this is the name of our array. This is the first element in the array, so I made it an empty array, so that way if we go to print it out, that null 0 oftentimes terminates the end of the string. Okay, so let's take a look at the output here. So this loop right here is going to actually loop through the rows of my array and print each one using the cout function. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll build it and we'll run it, and sure enough, you see right here when we scroll up here, this here is our initial array. So printed out here using that for loop. Okay, so we're going to reference a couple characters here using the indices here. So if you look at row number 3 here, it's actually here, it's the 4th row, and then you look at indice number 1, which would be the C right there. Okay, so notice there it starts with 0 for the row number and then also 0 for the column number. That represents my array 3, 1. Let's take a look yet again at my array row number 2, actually indice number 2, so right here, and then column number 4. That would be the R right here. Okay, so let's take a look at the transposed array and how we transpose it using 2 for loops, an inner and an outer for loop. So we scroll down to here, and this is our 2 for loop. So I used J on the outer one, so my outer loop is going to go via the columns. It's going to step from the first column to the last column using the index J. Alright, and then what happens here is I'm going to loop through on the inner loop for the rows. So you're going to pick the first column and then go down. So you notice that we read through the array that it reads here from heated. Okay, so the first row vertical. So this inner loop is going to actually go, it's going to follow the two-dimensional array vertically downward. Okay, and then we're going to copy it into this horizontal array. So that's what we do right here. This is copying each element, and notice I just flip the elements right here, I and j, so the column becomes a row, and vice versa. But on each row, at the end of the row, we want to assign a null 0, because notice that even though this is a two-dimensional array, it's the combination of two-dimensional arrays and strings. So that last column there, we're going to actually call that a null 0. When we declared it, we said rows plus 1, but because we started indice number 0, now we reference that last column with this value of rows. Okay, that's equal to the constant. So once again, we use a for loop here to print out our transposed array. In this case here, you notice that we go through the number of columns because now the rows in the second one have become the number of columns and vice versa. And when we look at the output of this here, notice here our transposed array now has 5 rows. Okay, so we mark it here. Look what we see: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Before it had 5 columns, now it has 5 rows. And we did a little simple check here. So if you look here, we see that here are the transposed characters. When you flip around the row and the column here, once again it is C, and then this other one is also R. So it's 3, 1, now it's 1, 3. So make sure you look at those indices on that output there. Let's take a look at the concatenation. Okay, so here's what happened. Our glued array here was, remember, it was an empty string that we initialized the variable glued, and we're going to use a strncat function, and our destination string is the glued. And what happens, it's going to actually concatenate each value of the transposed array. So it concatenates the first row, the second row, the third row, fourth row, and then finally the fifth row. Okay, and then what happens, we finally output that there, and let's take a look at our final output. Actually, here's our final output, this one here, and we can see that indeed this here matches these rows all here concatenated together. Thank you, goodbye, and my favorite cereal is Frosted Flakes.